This episode of Distraction is sponsored by Landmark College, offering 360-degree support for students with learning disabilities, ADHD, and ASD. Learn more at lcdistraction.org. Landmark College. We teach differently.
I love anxiety.
So why do you love anxiety?
Oh, well, the one I love the most is a combination of fear and shame, which produces shame anxiety. And that leads us to think we have a fear of failure.
Hello, this is Dr. Ned Hallowell, and welcome to Distraction. Today we have an extremely interesting guest. I've never met her before, so your introduction to her will also be mine, but just reading about her, she sounds fascinating. She's a psychologist and a psychoanalyst, as well as a professor. You don't usually see all three of those together. At the Wright Institute in Berkeley, a place where there are an awful lot of smart people, whose passion it is to encourage emotional awareness. Her name is Mary Lamia, and her latest book, she's quite a prolific author, but her latest book is called What Motivates Getting Things Done. And who of us does not want to get things done? So with that introduction, I'm really happy to learn from her. Welcome to Distraction, Professor Dr. Mary Lamia.
Thank you for having me, Ned.
It's really quite wonderful. So tell me, how would you encapsulate? I hate it when people ask me that. You know, I often want to say to them, look, if I could encapsulate it, I wouldn't have written a book.
Summarize your 300-page book in one paragraph?
Exactly. But if you want to hit some of the highlights, what would you say would bring people to this book? One thing I can say about it that immediately struck me, it's short. So if you want to get things done, you can read this book pretty quickly.
Right, and that was somewhat intentional.
Yeah.
You know, the book is really a short course on how emotions work. And I found that it's really important for people to know about their emotions and how they work. And it's very important for therapists to know how emotions work, although many therapists, believe it or not, don't know. But using the overall picture of how emotions work, I illustrate it by showing that people have different motivational styles. And I divide them into deadline-driven procrastinators and task-driven non-procrastinators. Because at the same time I was writing this book, I happened to be delving into how is it that some people can delay until a deadline is looming and other people have to do things right away. And I am not a procrastinator. I am anything but a procrastinator. However, my book actually vindicates all procrastinators. It is an amazing motivational style, and I've actually ended up with procrastination envy from writing this book. So basic premise is that there are two qualities, really, of highly successful people, at least all of the ones I studied. People who are successful in their endeavors or careers, however you want to define success, they never miss deadlines, and their work reflects their best efforts. That's it. So what I found is that the different task completion timing of successful people who are procrastinators and non-procrastinators has to do with when their emotions are activated and what activates them. Procrastinators are primarily motivated to complete tasks when their emotions are activated by an imminent deadline. They're deadline-driven. But in contrast, task-driven people, when we're faced with uncompleted tasks, we feel compelled to take action right away. We're motivated by our emotions to complete a task ahead of schedule and put it behind us and hopefully attend to the quality of our work in doing so. So missing a deadline or failing to do adequate work is a problem whose source has little to do with procrastination. Many people who fail to meet deadlines and become defeated over and over again might blame it on the idea that they have procrastinated or they tend to procrastinate when really they feel a lot of shame. And the emotion of shame motivates us to save face. Mm-hmm. And so what better excuse than I'm a procrastinator and that's why I fail? Mm-hmm. So all emotions motivate us. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And another basic premise of the book is to help people understand that classifying emotions as positive or negative has nothing to do with their value, but instead it involves how they motivate us through the ways they make us feel. So, I mean, you know this, negative emotions like distress and fear and anger and disgust and shame motivate us to do something to avoid experiencing them. Mm-hmm. They urge us to behave in ways that will relieve us of their effects. Mm-hmm. All emotions motivate us, including those negative ones. So, you know, when we think about it, we back off from a dangerous situation if we have fear, or we may be motivated to brush our teeth before a date to avoid shame due to bad breath. Mm-hmm. All emotions motivate us to do something, and we're motivated based on our desire to turn on positive emotions and turn off the negative ones. Mm-hmm. That's just a fundamental principle about how we function emotionally that people aren't really aware of.
I was struck you have an upcoming book called The Upside of Shame?
Yes, that will be out from Norton in February.
Oh, wow. So right around the corner.
And there's a chapter on there on ADHD that might interest you. And how the affect system interacts in ways that lead to that distraction and what that's all about. How ADHD is primarily a problem of abnormal processing in attentional networks and leads to shame.
Sure does. Sure does. I mean, I'm of course always at pains to stress the positive side of ADHD, which
absolutely positively,
which is creativity and originality.
In fact, one of my students wrote her dissertation on. She also looked at high achieving people who have ADHD and how they manage their lives without medication and how it drives them. No. So what is the upside of shame? What's good about shame? The upside of shame is that it motivates us to restore connection and what we lost. There's lots and lots of upsides to shame. It very much protects us, as all emotions do. Now, this is a very clinical book.
Oh, I see. Okay. So the fear of shame is what motivates us, huh?
Absolutely. So the fear of shame is quite a motivator.
So it's not shame itself. I mean, there's nothing very good about feeling ashamed.
Except that if we didn't feel shame, what kind of society would we have? Shame motivates us to do certain things to maintain a social order. Otherwise, we'd all be shameless and we'd be involved in shameless activities. So shame really does maintain the social order. I'll have to send you one of those books.
Okay. And what's the difference between shame and guilt?
Well, guilt in the affect system in which my co-author and I approached that book, guilt is a subset of shame. That shame is the primary affect and guilt is a subset of that. But we feel guilt when we feel we have to pay some restitution or do something to make it up to somebody, whereas shame is a very personal affect.
But I always think of shame as sort of coming from outside, people looking at you and finding you, bad, whereas guilt, you're looking at yourself and finding yourself bad.
Well, I think in both shame and guilt, it could involve other people or just ourselves. I mean, somebody could feel guilty and nobody else could know why. But we could be afraid. Yes, the fear of guilt and the fear of shame is a whole other can of worms, let's say. But they're very powerful emotions. Shame and guilt drive us like nothing else because they feel so toxic.
So the negative emotions, the painful emotions, I guess, would be a different way of describing. The painful emotions are more formative, more powerful than the positive, the pleasant emotions?
Well, all emotions motivate us. So, as I said, positive emotions are something we want to turn on and negative emotions we want to turn off. And that is why we're motivated by them. We're motivated to do something to get more positive feeling and less negative feeling. So when I studied these task-driven people and deadline-driven people, it was interesting to see how they use their emotions to motivate them to get things done.
What about when, take something like love. Love is rarely pure. It's usually composed of some painful emotions as well as some positive emotions. How do you sort that out?
Well, it's interesting because emotions can combine, or usually only one affect, biological-based affect, can be triggered at a time, but often emotions are triggered in combination or one after another, or one triggers the other. And emotions combine in very interesting ways. So we could feel fear and excitement at the same time, or the joy of love and the fear of separation at the same time. It's most obvious, actually, when we look at anxiety. Anxiety is an interesting one to look at because people say they feel anxiety, and yet what is their flavor of anxiety? Anxiety is one of those misunderstood negative emotions. But it is an octane for our motivation, just like shame is. So
an octane for motivation. I love that phrase. Anxiety.
Yeah, it really is a fuel. It's a fuel. I think one of the chapter in what motivates getting things done, or maybe it's in another book called Emotions, I have a chapter titled Anxiety is Your Friend, because it is.
In the book you mentioned, it's called Anxiety as an Engine of Task Completion.
Okay. Then it's my book called Emotions with an exclamation point where I have the chapter Anxiety is Your Friend. I love anxiety. And it's so misunderstood. So anxiety itself is not an innate emotion, but its various manifestations can be understood as a blending of different emotions that produce a certain response.
So what's the blend? What are the different emotions?
So let's take a look at some of the blends. When we feel stressed out, let's say, that is a blend of fear and distress, which, prompts us to do something.
Well, what's the difference between fear and distress?
Well, fear is an emotion that makes us want to back off from a situation to protect ourselves. And distress is a kind of constant agitation, let's call it. And that's how it feels inside of us, kind of a churning inside of us. And those two together make us feel stressed out. If we have a combination of fear and anger, we feel a kind of a tense agitation. Fear and excitement can combine together, and that way we feel positive and negative at the same time. Like you said, when you're in love and you're afraid that person might leave you, or if you go on a roller coaster ride, we often feel a combination of fear and excitement at the same time.
So why do you love anxiety?
Oh, well, the one I love the most is a combination of fear and shame, which produces shame anxiety. And that leads us to think we have a fear of failure. And when people, all kinds of highly successful people say, I fear failure. And what does that mean? That's the thought, the cognition associated with shame anxiety. And it just propels them into action.
So you love anxiety because
it motivates us in so many different ways. And if we...
But sometimes it can paralyze us.
Yes, it can. And especially when people don't understand what they're feeling. And often what paralyzes us, and from your work, is the thoughts we attribute to what we feel. That someone could feel very, very, very anxious and say they are paralyzed and afraid, and they're thinking all kinds of catastrophic thoughts. And yet they're not taking a look at why am I anxious and what am I trying to tell myself?
So it's like the deer in the headlights. I mean, the deer is paralyzed by anxiety, by fear, right?
Right. Emotions exist to help us pay attention. And, that's their purpose, to inform us, to give us information. What we attribute to them comes from our thoughts. And so this combination of what we feel and what we think is very important. And a lot of what we think is scripted from all of our past experiences. All of our emotional memories inform us when we feel something in the present. So if we fall in love with somebody in the present, our lifetime of emotional memories might say to us, this is going to go bad. And we may become very, very anxious and not want to pursue the relationship or have a fear of abandonment. All kinds of things come to our mind at those times. But those are based on our emotional past and not on the present.
So what do you do in that? What's good about that? I mean, if you're falling in love and you're saying to yourself, oh, I better get out of here because it's going to go bad.
Then we have to look at why is it we're having that response? And if we think back, we've had plenty of experiences where if we fled, it might have been useful. But does that really apply to this situation? Emotions just give us vague information about what's going on in the world at a given moment with us. And what we make of them has to do with our past experiences. So they're just trying to do their job by giving us information, by informing us. And it's important for us to understand them so that we're not misinformed.
But how do you know whether to trust the feeling or not? How do you know that you may be passing up the love of a lifetime?
That's right. So that's why when we feel, in our example, anxious about a current situation, it's very important to look back and consider, am I fearful because I've had so many experiences where I have felt abandoned, or is it something else? And does it really apply to this situation? It's important to interpret the messages our emotions convey and understand our reactions to them so we can make the most of our emotional system that motivates us. It motivates everything we do.
Sure. And another one of your books is called The White Knight Syndrome, Rescuing Yourself from Your Need to Rescue Others. Is that need to rescue others rooted in past emotional experiences as well?
Absolutely. In that book, we discuss different ways in which different motivations people have to rescue others, and this is based on their past experiences and how to become more balanced in your rescuing behavior rather than be responsive to your past and pathological in that process. Emotions motivate everything we do, and it's so significant in our lives that I just want people to understand them. When we think about our behaviors, our beliefs, our convictions, our political party preferences, our religious practices, also, to a large extent, are the result of our emotional memories that have become linked with an ideology. There's sort of a script that's been written in our implicit memory. So the way people are motivated to complete tasks is really no different. But then it makes us stand back and say, should we really be judging people the way we judge people for having different beliefs? Because those are based on their lifetime of memories.
Yeah, I don't think we should judge people at all personally, but that's another story. Your current book, What Motivates Getting Things Done, speaks to the problem of procrastination. And what is your advice to procrastinators?
Oh, Ned, don't say procrastination's a problem.
Okay.
It's not a problem.
Okay.
Contrary to popular belief, I found that procrastination does not necessarily interfere with success.
Okay.
People who wait are just as likely to be successful as people who complete tasks ahead of time. In fact, they're just amazing people, and they have quite a strategy to complete tasks, but it's all about their emotional lives. So
why does someone put something off until the very last minute?
Because their emotions are not activated until a deadline is looming.
Okay, so why not pretend the deadline is sooner?
Oh, sometimes they do. They have many tricks to create absolute deadlines when there are none. For example, if a procrastinator wants to write a book, you will often see them create deadlines in between their final goal and right now. Or one of the ways they do it, one of the biggest tricks they use are commitment incentives. So they tend to tell somebody else, by March 3rd, I will have 6 chapters written. Or they create a to-do list and make a promise to somebody that all these things are going to get done. Or they make a promise to themselves. They may have financial considerations, and those motivate them to get things done ahead of time. There are ways to create absolute deadlines when there are none. And in the book, I have troubleshooting guides and ways to optimize whatever motivational style you have. Isn't it funny, Ned, that we think procrastination is a problem when, in fact, people who are driven by having to get things done right now, that's a problem too.
Yeah, but coming back to procrastination just for a second, looking at it through the lens of ADHD, which, as you know, is one of my specialties, a lot of people with undiagnosed ADHD are basically self-medicating by creating a panic at the very last minute. So the procrastination leads them at the very last minute to panic, and when you panic, you get a big outpouring of adrenaline, which is nature's own stimulant medication. So without knowing it, they're self-medicating with adrenaline. And I would suggest it's a pretty maladaptive way of getting things done to, subject yourself to a torrent of stress hormones at the very last minute. And
Now I'm going to throw this in here for you, Ned.
Okay.
How about those of us who are task-driven and our distraction is hidden behind all the tasks that summon us? We don't relax. We don't ignore tasks that need attention. Instead, people who are task-driven are distracted by things they perceive need to be done, even if those things can be completed at another time or they are irrelevant. And their psychological stress results more from their perception of having to do everything right now. They're so busy all the time. And there's a lot of psychological stress that results from
believe me, I know my wife is like that. And just yesterday she was saying, am I ever going to get everything done for the holidays? I'm so stressed out. And I said, Sue, you've done it we've been married 29 years, and every single year you say the same thing, and every single year you get it done. Maybe try this year not stressing out so much about it. And she just doesn't know how to do that. She thinks it's all got to get done right now. And she's, in your categorization, she's very task-driven. And but the sad part is, just like the procrastinator gets a bath of stress hormones, she gets a bath of stress hormones by thinking she has to get it all done right now.
Absolutely. And so I have wondered who is more stressed out, task-driven people or the procrastinators. I would guess that task-driven people are far more stressed out than the procrastinators. The procrastinators get it in all one big lump of adrenaline, and their speed is at the deadline. But task-driven people are constantly busy. One woman told me that she had to get out of bed because she forgot to fold the laundry. It made her procrastinating husband crazy.
Yes. No, my wife she'll be right there folding right along with her. Absolutely. Absolutely. And she'll, if she lies down in bed just to chill out for a minute and we maybe watch a TV show, she'll be saying throughout the show, I should be doing something productive. I shouldn't be lying here. So I've tried to reframe it with her and say, consider spending quality time with your husband something that you should do. Put that on your to-do list.
Well, that's so interesting because what you're describing is shame anxiety. And for task-driven people, cognitions associated with shame anxiety include a fear of forgetting. They describe not wanting to be burdened with having to remember, or they're afraid they'll forget if they don't do something now. And they have, where procrastinators will have deadline extension fantasies, task-driven people have escape fantasies, like, oh, maybe something will happen and I'll get out of this.
Yes, exactly. I can buy my island in the Caribbean or something.
Right. Now, I have a whole series of troubleshooting guide for task-driven people in the book to help them learn how to pause and put aside a task. You know, sometimes they do things like task-driven people, just to get something off their plate, tend to send things off before it's really finished. They think it's finished at the moment. I always say that if you get an email with a document attached, and it says, you know, here it is, and then you get another email that says, well, read this one instead, it's usually from a task-driven person, because they want to get something off their plate, and then they go back and they see that it can be done differently. And they revise and they revise and they revise. You know, in a simple way, if they're decorating a house, they may do it, then they'll undo it. And it's not really obsessive-compulsive. It's really just being task-driven and having that anxiety, and it compels them to do something.
Yes, that's such a... You know, the French poet Verlaine had a great line. He said, a poem is never finished, only abandoned.
Oh, yeah.
There comes a time when you just have to abandon whatever it is you're working on if you're ever going to move along to the next thing.
Yes, and task-driven people have a hard time doing it. But you know what I'm talking about because you have your wife doing it. Are you a procrastinator? Well,
I'm an interesting combination of a little bit of both, probably more the task-driven. But, you know, I've just finished my 20th book, and so people say, how do you get them done? Having ADD, because I have ADD. And my honest answer is, I don't know. They just get done. And that's what it's interesting about your book. I think
but you're motivated, and really it doesn't matter if one procrastinates or one doesn't.
But I've never missed a deadline. I've never handed in a book late, you know.
The highly successful people I studied who were deadline-driven procrastinators never, ever miss deadlines.
It happens by magic somehow.
It happens by magic. You know, I always ask people, well, what did you do in elementary school? Did you come home and have to do your homework first, get it off your plate before you went out and played? Or could you put it aside and wait until sort of the last minute and you always got it done? And if you were one of those kids who could go out and play and have fun and put your homework aside, then you were a developing deadline-driven procrastinator.
Mary, we're running out of time. Would you be willing to come on the podcast again sometime?
Absolutely, anytime.
I have to tell you, you have one of the most lovely voices I've ever heard. You must be wonderful for your clients if you still see clients there.
Oh, I do. I see lots of them.
Oh, good. Well, you just have the most soothing, reassuring voice. And I love the breadth of your topics. You really, it sounds to me you sort of write about what interests you. And
I do.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to interview you again about other topics that interest you. Just for listeners, this book is outstanding. It's brief, to the point, and very practical, but it's also deep. It's not a superficial kind of book. It's that rare combination of deep but also practical and concise. What motivates getting things done? What motivates getting things done? Subtitled Procrastination, Emotions, and Success by Mary Lamia. Mary Lamia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ned, for your kind words especially.
Well, it's lovely to talk to you, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks again to Mary Lamia for joining us today. I really enjoyed talking to her, and she does have a most wonderful voice. She must be just a terrific therapist. I hope you enjoyed listening to her as much as I did. Her latest book, What Motivates Getting Things Done, Procrastination, Emotions, and Success, is available now. Make sure also to check out her website, marylamia.com, marylamia.com.
The episode you just heard was made possible by our sponsor, Landmark College, the college for students who learn differently, offering comprehensive supports for students with ADHD and other learning differences, both on campus and online. Learn more at lcdistraction.org.